Have you ever, like, snapped out of a 3-hour mindless feed-scrolling binge?
Oh, yeah. Or, one of those streaming autoplay marathons where you just can't stop.
Right. And instead of feeling rested after all that downtime, you just feel incredibly heavy.
Like a lingering, almost physical sense of emptiness.
Exactly. And today, we are actually tearing into the neurobiology and the philosophy behind why we willingly do this to ourselves.
It really is a fascinating contradiction.
It is. We're unpacking this dense philosophical critique of what the sources call the Chronophagic Cargo Cult.
Such a great term.
Yeah, basically the systematic destruction of time through the illusion of busyness. We really want to figure out why humans, beings with this seemingly limitless cosmic potential, actively choose to just simulate fake activity.
Simulating activity instead of actually producing real value.
Right. So to really grasp the gravity of this, we have to look past modern technology for a second.
We do. If we want to understand how we just casually throw our lives away, we need to observe the most stripped-down, visually obvious example of this.
Which is so simple, honestly.
It is. It's a person squatting on a street corner, methodically cracking sunflower seeds.
I love that we are starting there because, it's so universally recognizable.
Right. Everybody has seen it.
But you rarely think of it as a psychological trap. You just think, oh, it's just a guy eating seeds.
On the surface, sure. But if you observe the mechanics of it, it's a very specific 3-beat motor loop.
Okay, walk me through the loop.
So you take the seed, you bite the shell, extract the kernel, and spit the shell.
Take, bite, extract, spit.
Exactly. Take, bite, spit. Take, bite, spit. And the sheer banality of that loop is actually what makes it so dangerous.
Because it's so mindless.
Yeah, this isn't just a quirky habit. It's a stripped-down symptom of a much larger pathology. And this is where that term you mentioned comes in perfectly chronophagic behavior.
Chronophagic. Let's unpack that for a second for the listener because it's such a brilliant descriptor.
It really gets to the core of it.
So chrono, meaning time, and phagic, meaning eating or consuming, right?
That's the literal translation, time eating.
So these habits are literally eating our time.
And when you look at the actual math behind the specific time eating habit, it is staggering.
Let's hear the math.
Well, cracking a single sunflower seed takes roughly 10 seconds.
Okay.
So if someone sits there doing this for 3 hours a day...
Which, by the way, is a completely normal afternoon for plenty of people.
Oh, absolutely. But that adds up to almost 5 years of continuous waking life wasted over a 40-year period.
Like 5 entire years.
5 years, continually.
Just waking life gone.
Yeah.
You think about what a human being can accomplish in 5 years of focused effort.
It's immense.
You could, master 3 foreign languages. You could get a PhD.
Build a business.
Right, or just completely reinvent your entire trajectory in life. But instead, it's just a pile of empty shells.
It really is a tragedy of lost potential. And that brings us straight to the concept of the cargo cult.
Oh, this part of the sources was fascinating.
Yeah, so following World War II, anthropologists studying Melanesian islanders documented something really wild.
Set the scene for us.
So during the war, these islands were used as supply bases. The indigenous people saw airplanes dropping massive amounts of cargo, like food, tools, equipment.
It must have seemed like magic.
Totally. But when the war ended, the soldiers left, and the planes stopped coming.
Right.
So in an attempt to bring the planes back, the islanders built incredibly detailed replica airplanes out of wood.
Wow.
They carved wooden headsets. They marched in formation with wooden rifles.
They're trying to summon the result by just mimicking the behavior.
Exactly. They reproduced the external form of the activity, but without any understanding of the underlying function.
Oh, man. So the person cracking seeds for 3 hours is caught in that exact same cognitive trap.
Precisely. They are performing the ritual of being busy without generating a single drop of real output.
The hands are moving. The eyes are focused.
The jaw is working. The brain gets the subjective sensation of being, deeply occupied.
So the output is zero.
Right. The civilizational, intellectual, or even nutritional output is essentially zero.
Yeah.
If the goal was simply caloric intake, they would just buy a bag of shelled seeds and eat them in 60 seconds.
Right. So the action itself is the entire point. The result is just irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant.
You can look at this from an ethological perspective, too. When I was reading the sources, it immediately made me think of, a bear pacing rhythmically back and forth in a zoo enclosure.
Yes. stereotypic behavior.
Yeah.
When you take a highly complex creature equipped with a really rich, dynamic behavioral repertoire, and you place it in an impoverished environment,
Like a cage.
right, a cognitive vacuum, it just cannot handle the lack of input. So it begins to loop simplified motor cycles.
The bear paces the perimeter.
And the human cracks the seeds. The loop provides the illusion of activity to cope with just an unbearable lack of meaningful stimulation.
Okay, here is where this gets wildly uncomfortable for you, for me, for anyone listening.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Think about what we do every single night. That 3-beat rhythm of the sunflower seed is structurally identical to scrolling social media.
It really is.
Swipe, look, react. Swipe, look, react. Take, bite, spit.
Yep.
It's the exact same chronophagic cargo cult, just, executed with pixels instead of seeds.
You are performing a micro action that yields a micro reward. It's a tiny, predictable hit of dopamine.
But when you finally put the device down 2 hours later,
You are left with absolutely nothing tangible. The knowledge hasn't compounded. Your life hasn't improved.
which really forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. If this behavior yields no real creative or intellectual value, why is the human brain so compulsively driven to engage in it?
Why do we willingly choose the empty shells, right?
Yeah. If it feels so hollow afterward, what is the psychological motive driving us into the loop in the first place?
Well, the 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal actually diagnosed this hundreds of years before smartphones even existed.
Oh, the quote about sitting in a room?
Exactly. He observed that all of humanity's problems stem from our fundamental inability to sit quietly in a room alone.
I think about Pascal's observation all the time. It feels truer today than it did in the 1600s.
Absolutely.
But what is actually happening in the brain when we sit quietly? Like, why is it so unbearable for us?
Modern neurobiology finally gives us the mechanics behind his intuition. See, when there is no external task demanding your attention, your brain doesn't just, power down.
Right, it's not a computer going to sleep.
No, it activates a specific neural circuit called the default mode network, or DMN.
The DMN.
And the DMN is primarily responsible for self-referential thinking.
Okay.
So the moment you aren't distracted by a task or a screen, your brain immediately turns its spotlight inward. It starts thinking about you.
Oh, wow. And if you don't like what you see, that spotlight feels like an interrogation lamp.
That's a perfect way to put it. I mean, for a person who is living without a profound sense of purpose or who lacks a defining, difficult project in their life, thinking about themselves triggers deep existential anxiety.
Because you have to face reality.
Right. The DMN surfaces all those questions you've been avoiding. Like, what am I actually doing with my life? Is this all there is? Am I living up to my potential?
And those are terrifying questions if you don't have good answers prepared.
It's truly terrifying.
I remember reading about that psychological experiment in the sources that tested exactly this, like this intolerance for the cognitive void.
The shock experiment.
Yes. So researchers put people in a completely barren room. No phones, no books, no windows.
It's just a chair and a button.
Just a chair and a button. And they were asked to sit alone with their thoughts for up to 15 minutes.
Such a short amount of time, really.
But the catch was that pressing the button would deliver a mild but genuinely painful electric shock.
And the results of that study are just a profound indictment of our relationship with ourselves.
That's crazy.
A significant portion of the participants deliberately chose to administer electric shocks to themselves rather than sit there in silence.
They preferred literal physical pain to being alone with their own minds. That really reframes the whole sunflower seed behavior.
It does. It's not just a bad habit.
It's a defense mechanism.
Yes, it functions as an anesthetic. Psychologists refer to this state as soft dissociation.
Soft dissociation.
We aren't fully checking out of reality, but we're using these rhythmic, predictable rituals to mentally blur the edges of our existence.
Wow.
We use the phrase killing time so casually, but think about what that implies. Time is the only truly non-renewable resource you possess. So to actively seek to kill it is a psychological strategy of evasion. We kill time to avoid meeting ourselves.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here, because I can hear people listening to this and thinking, hold on, what about just relaxing?
Right, the need to unwind.
I mean, the modern world is incredibly stressful. Don't our brains need a break from constant productivity? Isn't scrolling or, watching a show just harmless downtime?
It's a very natural defense to make, but we really have to understand the clinical distinction between genuine rest and compulsive behavior.
Okay, what's the difference?
Genuine rest is restorative. When you sleep deeply, when you take a long walk in nature, or when you practice deliberate meditation, you are actively restoring your cognitive capacity.
You're recharging the battery.
Right, you are clearing out metabolic waste in the brain. Compulsion, on the other hand, does the exact opposite.
Because it's not actually turning the brain off.
Exactly. It keeps the brain locked in a state of low-level, continuous cognitive arousal. And these compulsive, low-effort dopamine loops actually degrade the prefrontal cortex over time.
Degrade it.
Yes. The prefrontal cortex is the area of your brain responsible for executive function sustaining attention, long-term planning, willpower.
The stuff we actually need to achieve our goals.
Right. So when you spend hours in a chronophagic loop, you aren't restoring those functions, you are atrophying them. It is neurodegradation disguised as leisure.
That is a terrifying distinction. Rest restores the prefrontal cortex. Compulsion degrades it.
It's a crucial difference.
So if we understand this underlying vulnerability, this desperate need to avoid the void of the default mode network, it becomes pretty obvious that society hasn't just ignored this weakness.
Oh, not at all.
Entire industries have been built to weaponize it. We've basically scaled the sunflower seed up into massive civilizational traps.
The human need for distraction has been fully industrialized. What starts as cracking seeds on a street corner evolves into socially acceptable, heavily monetized behaviors that consume years of human life.
Give me an example from the sources.
Well, consider the architecture of extreme sports fandom.
Oh, right. Spending 20 hours a week, memorizing stats, watching games, arguing about draft picks for a team of people who don't know you exist.
Exactly. And the neurobiological mechanism hacking your brain here is proxy agency.
Proxy agency.
And it is facilitated by your mirror neurons.
So how does that work?
When you watch an elite athlete achieve something incredible, like a game-winning shot or a massive physical feat, your mirror neurons fire in a pattern that closely mimics the actual action.
So your brain physically simulates the achievement.
Yes. You experience a rush of adrenaline and a false sense of triumph. You jump up off the couch and yell, "We won!"
But the we is a complete illusion. I mean, you didn't run the drills. You didn't push your body to the limit. You didn't score.
Right. You are effectively stealing the dopamine of achievement without putting in a single ounce of physical or psychological effort.
It's a neurobiological heist?
That's a great way to say it. And because the brain gets the reward without the work, it becomes deeply addicted to the proxy experience rather than pursuing real-world achievement.
Which is wild. And you see this same reward hacking and online political tribalism, too.
Oh, absolutely.
And just to be clear for the listener, the sources point this out regarding all sides of the political spectrum. It doesn't matter what the ideology is. Leaving an angry comment or getting into a massive digital argument triggers this immediate neurochemical cocktail.
It really does. It is a highly addictive blend of dopamine, adrenaline, and oxytocin.
It provides the ultimate illusion of agency.
Yes. When you are outraged online, you feel like a warrior. You feel like you are fighting for justice, defending your tribe, doing something fundamentally important.
But the reality is that typing an angry paragraph changes absolutely nothing in the physical world.
Nothing at all.
It just provides an immediate, intense emotional hit. It is just a simulation of civic participation.
It's the wooden radio all over again.
Yes. You're performing the ritual of a political activist without generating any actual societal cargo.
Exactly. And there are softer versions of this too, like an obsession with astrology or celebrity gossip.
Oh, astrology is a fascinating one.
It is an example of delegating executive function. By attributing your personality flaws or your life choices to the alignment of stars, you bypass the incredibly hard work of actual introspection and self-correction.
You just outsource the blame.
Right. And gossip functions similarly. You spend massive amounts of cognitive energy analyzing and dissecting other people's lives.
Which feels like complex problem solving.
It does feel like that. But you are utilizing your intellect on a closed loop that prevents you from building complex systemic thinking regarding your own future.
Okay, let's ground this for a second because it's starting to feel like we can't enjoy anything.
I know, it sounds intense.
Are we saying that watching a football game on a Sunday or reading the news or knowing what a celebrity did is inherently toxic?
Not inherently, no. It
Yeah.
is entirely a question of proportion and function.
Proportion and function.
Right. Are these activities a brief moment of entertainment, like a spice added to a robust life? Or have they become your primary identity?
Ah, I see.
The trap closes when the simulation serves as a substitute for building your own reality. If you have a 20-page strategy mapped out for your fantasy football team, but absolutely zero strategy mapped out for your own career or family over the next 5 years.
Then you are a full-fledged member of the cargo cult.
Exactly.
Man, that hits incredibly hard. So if we spend all our time hiding in these comfortable dopamine-driven traps, constantly seeking proxy achievements, what is the ultimate cost? Where does this lead the human psyche?
This is where the biological and the philosophical intersect perfectly. We have to look at something called the ontological signal.
The ontological signal.
Yeah, and to understand this, we really need to redefine the concept of the conscience. We usually think of the conscience as a moral judge, an angel on our shoulder telling us right from wrong. But biologically, it functions more like an internal navigation system.
So it's less of a moral compass and more of an internal GPS.
And like a GPS, when you veer off your optimal route, it starts recalculating loudly.
We'll make a U-turn.
Exactly. It is constantly monitoring the gap between what you are currently doing and what your underlying potential actually allows for.
Wow.
When your actions fall drastically short of your capabilities, when you are cracking seeds instead of building a life, that navigation system sends a distress signal.
Which registers as a physical unease, like a low-grade hum of anxiety that something is deeply wrong.
Yes. And how do most people respond to that signal?
They try to drown it out.
They reach for alcohol, they binge watch another season of a show, they go shopping.
But the signal doesn't vanish.
No, it amplifies. And the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre described this amplification as existential nausea.
Existential nausea.
He argued that feeling sick about your own existence isn't just a biological glitch, it is the nausea of existing without a defining project.
You feel the crushing weight of your own existence.
Yeah.
Because it isn't anchored to anything meaningful. It's just floating in a void.
Precisely. And when you systematically ignore the signal of unfulfilled potential, that nausea metastasizes into profound apathy and despair.
Which brings us to one of the most striking analogies used in the sources to describe this state.
The cancer cell analogy.
Okay, I really want to tackle this head on, because comparing a human being who struggles with procrastination or time wasting to a biological cancer cell feels incredibly harsh.
It does.
I mean, it feels almost antagonistic. How are you and I supposed to process that kind of comparison without just feeling awful about ourselves?
I get that. But it is meant to be clinical, not insulting.
Yeah.
Let's look at the mechanics of a biological cancer cell.
Good.
A healthy cell operates in a cooperative system. It consumes resources, yes, but it also contributes to the overall health and function of the organism.
It does its job.
Right. A cancer cell, however, is a cell that has turned off its regulatory mechanisms.
Okay.
It continues to consume blood supply, nutrients, and space from the host, but it completely stops contributing to the cooperative system.
It grows purely for its own sake.
Exactly, while slowly damaging the whole.
So a person who merely consumes resources, entertainment, food, safety, without ever producing value or contributing back to the civilizational structure, is mimicking that biological pathology.
That's the argument.
I understand the logic, but it's still a heavy label to wear.
It is heavy, but there is a crucial fundamental difference that prevents this analogy from being a death sentence.
Thank goodness. What is it?
Metacognition.
The ability to think about our own thinking.
Exactly. A cancer cell cannot realize it is a cancer cell. It lacks the biological hardware to observe its own behavior and change course.
But a human being doesn't.
Right. A human being possesses metacognition. You can observe your own chronophagic loops, you can recognize the systems you are caught in, feel the existential nausea, and consciously choose to change your vector.
We are not prisoners of our biology.
Never.
That is the ultimate relief right there. The awareness itself is the escape hatch.
It really is.
So, having diagnosed the pathology and faced the reality of this wasted potential, what is the way out? How do we actually break the cargo cult conditioning?
Well, the sources outline what they call the technocratic solution. And the first step is brutal, uncompromising honesty.
Honest with ourselves.
Yes. You have to admit to yourself, without any protective narratives, that you are using these rituals to hide.
No more excuses.
Right. You have to stop saying, I'm just unwinding, or I had a hard day, I deserve to scroll.
You have to label the behavior accurately.
You have to say, I am hiding from the difficulty of my own potential.
But there is a huge caveat here, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't just replace the scrolling with self-hatred. Beating yourself up doesn't fix the loop.
No, guilt is completely useless here. In fact, guilt is just another emotional trap. Sitting there calling yourself lazy or worthless is a ritual that wastes cognitive energy and provides the illusion that you are addressing the problem without requiring you to actually change your behavior.
Wow.
Self-flagellation is just cracking seeds with tears in your eyes.
Cracking seeds with tears in your eyes. Wow. That is such a powerful image.
It's a trap so many fall into.
So if guilt is out, what is the actual mechanical strategy for rewiring the brain?
You have to trigger a dopamine prediction error.
A dopamine prediction error. Okay, explain that.
So the brain operates on predictive models. Right now, your brain expects a steady, cheap drip of dopamine from passive consumption.
Right.
To break the loop, you must engage in an activity where the expected reward is low or difficult, but the actual payoff is immense.
Can you give me an example of how that prediction error works in real time?
Sure. Imagine you decide to learn a complex piece of music on the piano. Your brain predicts frustration and effort, so it doesn't want to do it. But you force yourself to sit down, you struggle, you practice, and suddenly your hands execute the chord progression perfectly.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. The brain is flooded with a massive, unexpected surge of dopamine. That error between what it predicted, frustration, and what it got, the ecstasy of mastery, physically rewires the neural pathways.
So your brain learns to crave the effort.
Exactly. You are literally earning the ecstasy instead of borrowing it.
This sounds like the pursuit of what psychologists call flow state.
Flow state, or what ancient philosophers called eudaimonia.
Right, true, deep psychological flourishing.
And it never comes from maximizing comfort. It only comes from producing something that extends beyond your personal consumption.
Like building a skill.
Creating art, solving a systemic problem.
We have to shift from being consumers of time to producers of value.
That's the core shift.
And if you zoom out far enough, this isn't just about personal self-help. There is a cosmic imperative here, which the sources touch on.
Yes, the concept of cosmism.
Right. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the pioneer of astronautic theory, famously said that Earth is the cradle of humanity, but mankind cannot stay in the cradle forever.
The underlying philosophy there argues that human beings are not a finished product.
We are an intermediate phase.
We are the raw material for a higher form of intelligence and capability. But making that evolutionary leap requires deliberate, sustained effort.
We have to stop pacifying ourselves with digital toys.
And choose projects that demand our absolute focus.
Okay, I want to bring this all the way down to earth for the person listening right now.
Let's do it.
If someone recognizes themselves in the seed cracker or the doom scroller and they want to break out today, what is the very first actionable step? Because they can't just wake up tomorrow and build a rocket ship.
No, trying to change your entire life overnight is a guaranteed recipe for failure.
Too much pressure.
Well, the brain cannot handle the sudden withdrawal of all its cheap dopamine sources. The metabolic shock is just too high.
So what's the tactical approach?
The approach from the text is to replace just one chronophagic session a day with one session of deep, meaningful effort.
Just one substitution.
Just one. We rely on Hebb's law of neuroplasticity. Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Okay.
You have to mechanically weave a new neural rope, one individual synapse at a time. If you normally spend from 8:000 p.m. to 9:00 p.m. scrolling on your phone, you commit to replacing that specific hour with focused study, writing, or physical training.
You are laying down the first physical tracks of a new mental architecture.
Precisely. You prove to your nervous system, through empirical action, that effort yields a higher quality of satisfaction than passivity.
And then it gets easier?
Once that first hour is secured, you gradually expand the territory of your effort. But it all begins with a single, honest choice to stop consuming and start producing.
You literally wire your brain for greatness 1 hour at a time.
That's the power of neuroplasticity.
What an incredible journey we've been on today. We started on the street corner, observing the 3-beat rhythm of the sunflower seed, and realized it is the exact blueprint for our modern digital lives.
The cargo cult of simulating busyness.
Simulating busyness without generating results. And then we waded into the psychological dread of the default mode network.
Understanding why we are so terrified of sitting alone in a room that we'd rather shock ourselves.
Which is still just wild to me. We dismantled the civilizational traps from the proxy achievements of sports to the neurochemical rage of political tribalism.
All those ways we hide.
And finally, we found the exit strategy. Bypassing guilt, utilizing dopamine prediction errors, and reclaiming our cosmic potential through deliberate effort.
It is a fundamental shift in how we perceive our own existence. Time is not a burden to be killed, it is the raw material of our evolution.
And I want to remind everyone listening right now, time is the only truly non-renewable resource you will ever possess. You are not a helpless victim of your genetics, and you are not a prisoner to the algorithms designed to capture your attention.
Not at all.
Neuroplasticity is real. Your capacity for metacognition means you can rewrite your operating system whenever you decide to put in the work.
The biological hardware is waiting for you to give it a worthy command.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, building on everything we've unpacked today.
This is a great thought experiment.
Imagine if an alien anthropologist were to arrive on Earth today and objectively observe how you spent your last 48 hours.
Just purely observing behavior.
Right. They can't hear your internal monologues or your future plans. They can only measure where you directed your physical attention and your time.
That changes the perspective entirely.
Based purely on those actions, what would they assume your life's greatest mission was? Are you building a legacy that will outlast you? Or are you just sitting in the dark cracking seeds?
Something to really think about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it inspired you to step out of the cargo cult and start building something real today.